Hi there. In this lecture, Mikhail Tal is meeting Aivars Gipslis, who was later also to become pretty famous and a strong grandmaster. So this is their 1951 encounter as kind of junior players. So Aivars Petrovich Gipslis, he was born in Riga. And just to give a little bit of background, you know, when still a teenager, he actually won the Latvian championship for the first of 8 times. So he played 6 times in the Soviet championship, finishing third in 1966 edition. So he later became a GM in 1967. So he had some really good results, and he was also a prolific journalist later. Editor of the Latvian magazine, actually, SARS. So it was also a grandmaster in correspondence chess. So this is, you know, their epic early encounter. d4 from Mikhail Tal. Gipslis plays knight f6. c4, e6. Knight c3, bishop b4. Bishop g5, d5. Queen c2, knight bd7. a3. And you might have a little bit of insecurity about this variation if you have tried it. That okay, you get a dark square bishop without a counterpart. That's good if you can get to use it later. The problem is the queen is using a lot of development tempo here, and all of these guys are kind of asleep. So the lack of development, the potential for tempo gaining, you know, it's a very interesting position for both sides. We see h6, bishop h4, black castle. So white is a long way from castling here. Knight f3, b6, e3, bishop b7. And now Mikhail Tal actually does commit a kind of principal crime, in a way, a violation. Instead of getting on with things to try and castle, there's an active operation, knight e5. And in fact, this wasn't punished. Queen c8 is a mistake, but still leads to black having a fantastic position, because there are other mistakes which mar things. But actually black had just knight takes e5 with the idea of knight e4. And this would have definitely been, you know, very nice for black. For example, this situation is pretty nice for black. It's going to be very good play for black. For example, like this, it's even. And yeah, this was the way to go. If we rewind here, instead of bishop takes c7, if bishop e7 is an example, then that's absolutely fine as well. So these variations do offer black quite good play and compensation. But queen c8 was played. Okay, knight takes d7, knight takes d7, rook c1, and now c5. And it seems as though, is this a bit courageous or is it logical? Well, we have c takes, bishop takes d5, and now it's Tal's turn to make a kind of, definitely this is a definite violation of principles. These guys, you know, they do want to help the king castle, but the thing is now it's also inconvenient because of the g2 pressure to move the bishop, unless white's going to do a g-file, you know, hack attack. So, but Tal actually wants to open up, it seems, his queen with d takes c5 along this diagonal, which can be useful in the future, but a more prudent move may have been f3 to blunt the bishop. So, for example, c takes, e takes. This situation, white can kind of get a good enough position to play from. It's about equal, but it's miserable. White does, miserable in certain respects, that's a bit unfair. White does have the bishop pair. If you're biased to not having a nice static queen's pawn, you could conceive it as miserable, but there is play for both sides. Technically, it's about equal. However, with d takes c5, we do get the full wrath of black's play here, piece play. Black's poking into squares like b3 here. Black's rooks are connected, and we see rook d1 here, and now queen b7. And the full horror is starting to emerge here that this queen can be subject to extra tempo gainers, which could be extremely handy to black. Another move here, just to show, knight b3, knight b3. If queen takes, rook f takes c8, this position where black can play, you know, very actively and get a rook to the 7th shows that actually it's too much compensation. Black is gathering too much compensation here. Big advantage. These rooks can't get that active that quickly. But with queen b7 as well being a good move, we have b4 and now a tempo gain on knight e4. Queen d4, rook ac8. We see that this isn't a fantastic position in many respects. We see f3, knight c3, and now rook a1. The thing is, we can already see tactical pain here. If the rook doesn't go to a1, if it goes to c1, can you see what black plays for 50 points? Yeah, I mean, white essentially has got this prize bishop, but these guys, you know, they're not really protecting each other, and there's a tactic here which would blast white's position to smithereens. If Tal had played the rook to c1, okay, I hope you can spot it. Knight e2 would double attack the queen and c1. And if rook takes, we're just going to take the queen. It's just a thoroughly miserable position, essentially, this kind of thing. So we're hitting the rook, we're hitting the queen. You know, this shows that it's kind of miserable, rook a1. But now, this is the amusing thing about this particular game. Gipslis could have really embarrassed Mikhail Tal, in my view, by playing a kind of zugzwangy move, not committing to any exacerbation of soft spot weaknesses around the king. So Mikhail Tal, as we know, was later to become the top attacking player, you know, one of the most attacking players of all time. So these soft spots around the king, if you look at Mikhail Tal games, opponents should be careful not to weaken these squares, whether they're occupied by a pawn or not, as this square. Let's put it in a different colour. Okay, now black plays g5, and even though it's not occupied by a pawn, you know, these are still basically soft spots, whether they're occupied by pawns or not. Now, soft spots, for me, you know, when I won the Lloyd's Under-18, National Under-18 in 1989, I did have a strategy of using my best resources on squares around the opponent's king. Now, this game reminds me of that actually, yeah, those soft spots where the king, which is the most valuable piece, is protecting things, or just simply the squares or pieces around the opponent's king. If you can get those as killer common squares, you're onto a good thing. And you might think, well, this bishop's been pushed back. There's no way it can be involved in these squares, right? There's no way this dark square bishop without a counterpart can ever be involved in any of these squares. Well, let's have a look at that. There's a dark square of interest, right? And we've got a dark square bishop. So where does Mikhail Tal put his bishop for 100 points? Okay, he actually plays it to g3, and this is important because sometimes we can get a killer kind of soft spot, whether it's a pawn or just a square, because here, how do we set up a killer common square on g7? We'd use a battery. I'll give you a clue. So what would be a battery move we're looking for? If we had two moves here, what would we play for white in relation to g7? So this is where my pet, you know, killer common square theory intersects with bishop without a counterpart, because it's a killer common dark square bishop without a counterpart. So it intersects here. And actually, you know, we can use a battery to create a common square with the principal threat of queen f6 and bishop e5, actually. So if you think that's the threats, yeah, that would be good in principle. If we get that, we're looking at g7 and at h8, of course. So, you know, these two become, I mean, all of these squares become kind of potentially fatal, these dark squares, g7 and h8. But black hugely blunders. But before we even get into that, the funny thing about this game, if black didn't weaken g7 and played bishop b3, white is in a kind of terrible zugzwang, in a way. All moves tend to be total disaster moves, actually, for Mikhail Tal. I mean, it's only young Mikhail Tal, let's forgive me, he's on his way up. But bishop d3, as an example, you know, g5 here, is a very, very different story, because you know, the queen is sitting in front of the bishop, and the bishop hasn't got bishop e5 here. You might wonder, well, hold on, Kingscrusher, what about bishop g3 here. Yeah, bishop g3. Well, the thing is, this is still a dangerous position, and there are resources based on, if we do this and then there's the threat of bishop e5, sure, but black has things like rook takes d3 as an example, and then can take out that bishop. So for example, check, and then it's kind of nasty. We can take out that bishop as a simple example with advantage. So it's actually a different story here. So yeah, bishop d3 doesn't seem to do well. Rook c1 runs into knight e2. You can see that the queen's not fantastic as a target here. Bishop e2 runs into knight takes e2, and rook c2 check. And this position with queen a6, it's white's king that would suffer immediate exposure, especially e2, because black also, you could argue, has the bishop at counterpart, and the killer soft spot intersecting of the bishop with at a counterpart is e2, as well as f1 could be dangerous. So we could set up maybe an equivalent battery, or we can just get a killer common square of the rook and queen on e2, and this is just horrendous. Black's totally winning this. But yeah, so bishop b3, it seems on the evidence, and yes, with latest engine technology, it's easy to find out bishop b3. It looks as though white is suffering a great deal in this position, a great deal. So it's very, very interesting. I mean, also, by the way, f6 is interesting. So, for example, here, that's no good because the queen takes c3. But if we go to b3, so that's one of the points of the bishop being on b3. It's eyeing d1 as well. But here, we see that, rook f d8, knight d1 check. The bishop's also got a use on the light square d1, so black will be winning here. So it was just an excellent position, but with g5 it's giving a sniff of a chance, and we do have bishop g3. So killer common soft spot squares. This is something maybe to conceptualize, especially if you look your bishop without the counterpart. Which one in particular? This one or this one? And black makes a gigantic blunder here. Gigantic, absolutely gigantic. Black plays a very overly optimistic move, expecting a certain sequence which can be bypassed, and bypassed in such a way that only the downsides of black's play are being advertised, not the upsides. Black plays bishop takes f3. Huge mistake, huge. Now, I mean, there were other ways of playing it. So guess what Mikhail Tal plays in this position for 100 points. I hope it's pretty clear from earlier analysis what you want to do with the killer common square soft spots. Queen f6. Yes, gigantic threat of bishop e5. Gigantic. This is really a knife in black's position without any counterpart. It's just carving these dark squares. The f pawn is restrained with queen f6. It's a fantastic move. The opposite move would be g takes, where in fact black gets an absolutely crushing position. For example, like this, and it will be end of game. So yeah, queen f6. All of a sudden, the tables have turned. This is probably one of the biggest table turnarounds you'll see. At least in the top 20, no, maybe in the top 100 of Mikhail Tal games. Okay, this is a table turnaround. Now, queen f6. We have queen e4, which makes things even worse. Knight e4 might be the best move. Yeah, losing a piece. And white might have to play a bit accurately, though. For example, here, it looks a little bit scary to go into a self-pin. But it turns out that then, white's threatening bishop takes e4 and can get back in the game. For example, here is winning for white. So with care, it should be fine, knight e4 as well. But queen e4 makes things a whole load worse. Okay, so what does white want to play in this position? Yeah, I appreciate the new threat though. Queen takes e3, so not bishop e5. Not bishop e5, just take this bishop. it's a bishop to be taken here. If we play bishop e5, I know I've emphasized that, but we've got to look at the new circumstances in chess. And here, you know, queen takes e3 and white's getting mated. So after queen e4, we just take the bishop here. No problem. The damage has been done with the threat of bishop e5. Damage was done. Queen c2. And now Tal plays bishop a6, and black resigns. He's a piece down. So, you know, if he continued, you know, simple and strong is just castling here. Piece up, no problems, and it's a nice attacking position to play with the extra bishop, extra piece, 2 bishops against the knight there. So there's drama behind the scenes of this game, and it's also a future grandmaster Gipslis. So a fascinating kind of iconic struggle, and shows don't be too optimistic. I think a takeaway, as well as the brilliance of Mikhail Tal's play. A good player is always lucky, by the way, according to Kapelenka. As well as the brilliance and luck of Mikhail Tal's play, I think we've got to say to ourselves, we can't be overly optimistic in calculating a variation which only highlights the upsides of what we want to do, when we've actually committed downsides, like we've emphasized potentially dangers of soft spots around our king. It was so rapid how Tal got around to this soft spot with queen f6 and bishop e5 potential as a threat. So a fascinating game, just to bear that in mind. And if you can avoid emphasizing the soft spots around your king with a kind of waiting move, if you have got a lead in development, especially in this variation, it's quite often about the dart square bishop, the 2 bishops, versus black's ability to activate the rooks quickly and gain tempo on the queen. So this is very much an interesting pattern of what could happen. It can also sometimes be disastrous for white, but on this occasion it was okay because Tal hit a bit of luck the way black played it, in my view. Okay, thanks very much. Hi there. Thanks for getting to the end of the YouTube video. If you would like to see other Mikhail Tal games, I actually have an amazing course for Mikhail Tal, which is currently at 4.9 with over 400 students. You can check this out from the Kingscrusher TV page. So Chess Strategy and Tactics, Mikhail Tal's amazing games. You can check out some free preview videos as well here. If you do expand all sections, you can see the preview links to get some free previews. So I hope you do check out this course index and the free previews. So I really had a thrilling time actually checking out Mikhail Tal's games. So yeah, the YouTube video here you saw was just a sample from this course. I hope you check it out. Okay, thanks so much. Oh, by the way, comments, questions, likes, shares, all appreciated. And if you did get to this part of the video, please do leave some sort of comment like Tal fan. Okay, thanks again.